This is my Toyota MR2 that I bought non-running. This is an import from Japan. You can see here, right-hand drive. Does have a Momo steering wheel, which is pretty nice, but it wasn't running. So we had to figure out what was going on. Now originally, I bought this car non-running, and we found out that it was the fuel pump that went bad. After a few hours of diagnosing, I was able to figure out the fuel pump wasn't working. So we dropped the tank out, got everything off, got the new fuel pump in, and it started right up. However, there was a noise once it finally warmed up. So we know the car has some sort of noise. It's either rod knock or piston slap. In my opinion, it's not deep enough to be rod knock. It also only happens once the oil warms up and gets a little less thick. So we're gonna see what it is. Things we do know about the car. So we do know compression is good. I've tested that already. We know timing is good because the engine runs well. It just has that knock. So we know everything up here should be fine. The only thing we're going to be concerned about is what's going on under here. So the goal for today is to just try and diagnose exactly what that noise is under there. So we're going to pull the oil, we're going to pull the pan, and worst case scenario, if we have to pull the engine, we'll pull that too and see how bad the damage.
So once I finally got under the car, I noticed that the transmission bracket was actually missing 2 of its bolts. So whether or not this is the source of our noise, it's something that needs to be fixed either way. So I went through my spare bin of bolts, I found 2 of them that fit, and I ran them through. Now those threads were pretty rusty, so I did have to run them back and forth a few times to get all that rust out. But once it was out, they went in perfectly fine, and they're going to hold for a while. It's just interesting that they weren't there in the first place. After placing those transmission bolts in the transmission mount, it was time to get the oil out and take a look at what the oil is looking like. Hopefully it's not all sparkly, and hopefully there's no bits of metal on the end of our drain plug, but we'll see how that goes.
Take a look at the drain plug here. Come on, you can focus it. No real big chunks on that, so I don't really see a lot of metal in here, so it's probably going to be something else. Let's take a look at this oil here. Now, this bucket was already a little bit dirty before, but there's no real metal flakes in it. It looks pretty good, if we're being completely honest.
So at this point, I was pretty skeptical about it being a bearing. The oil looked good. I even pulled the oil and filter off previously, and the filter inside of it looked completely fine. So at this point, I was just kind of thinking it was a long shot, but I thought, let's just go ahead and pull the oil pan off. It's easy enough. The only thing really blocking it was a few mounting brackets for the transmission and then the exhaust. Now, in this case, getting the exhaust off was going to prove to be a little bit harder than we had hoped. But before we get to the taking the exhaust off, we actually do need to take off a few brackets that mount to the transmission. It's blocking access to our oil pan bolts, and then after that we can start pulling the exhaust off. Now, pulling this exhaust off seems like a pretty straightforward task. However, this car was in Japan and it is fairly rusty. Even after soaking it in penetrant fluid on PB Blaster, it still took a while to get these bolts off. So I ended up just grabbing the impact. I actually had to go to my buddy's to grab his impact because the impact I had was not strong enough to get those off. However, once I grabbed his, it was fairly easy. They came right off. However, the issue I soon ran into was the other 2 bolts on the back side of the exhaust. Those were also rusted in, and once I tried using my buddy's impact on them, it basically fully stripped them. So instead of sitting there fighting with those for the next 2 hours, I decided I'm just going to pull the exhaust down just enough so that I can sneak the oil pan out of there and get it out without having to take the entire exhaust off and fight those rusted bolts for the next 5 hours.
Alright, after struggling with that exhaust for a while and getting it off, I was able to get the oil pan off. So let's take a look at it and see what we see. So, looking at the oil, you can actually see here is some rod bearing material. We'll focus on it. Yep, that's all rod bearing right there. And if I slosh the oil around, you can kind of see some copper bits. That is all rod bearing material. So, at this point, we definitely know that the rods have gone bad, or at least one of them has. So we're gonna investigate the bottom of the engine a bit more, see what those rods are looking like, and if we just need to put new rod bearings on it, we can do that, or if we have to pull the entire motor and rebuild the whole thing, we'll do that too. But let's investigate a bit more and see what's going on in there. Oh boy, you can really see this piece. That's a big piece right there, and you can see it all in the oil there. So yeah, that rod has definitely gone bad. Alright, let's get this little cover off here. We're going to take a look at that last piston in the back over there, and then we're going to start pulling these caps off. We're going to start pulling these caps off of the rods here and see which one went. Either way, they all have to come off because they're all going to get replaced. And then we can go from there and see which one got it the worst. It's probably the one furthest from the oil pump, but it could be any of them. So let's get started on that.
First step I'm going to take in this is getting the oil pickup off and then getting that splash shield from under it off as well. Now, once I got that oil pickup off, I did want to take a look at it just to see if there's any metal shavings in it. And of course, we did see a few, right? We do know that there are bearing materials inside of this oil. However, the bearing material is big enough to where it actually didn't even get through the mesh on the oil pickup. So thinking that even got through into the pump is pretty unlikely. And looking at it, everything looks fairly clean either way. So honestly, I have pretty high hopes in thinking that we can just replace the bearings and that we caught it early enough to where we don't have to replace this entire motor.
The oil pickup actually doesn't look too bad. We caught most of the pieces, and most of the pieces actually fell to the bottom, so this engine might be saved. This exhaust being in the way makes it much harder.
If I'm being honest, working under the car like this on the ground does suck. There's not a lot of room to break bolts loose, and there's really just not a lot of room in general, but I was able to get those rod caps off. It's just 2 bolts on each side. I like to break them with a breaker bar just so I know how tight they are, and then after that we can finally pull these off and get a look at the bearings and see how bad they are.
Alright, I got that bearing off, and we can actually take a look at it. So here's the rod cap itself. Doesn't look too bad. A few hot spots for sure, but it could look worse. What does look bad is this bearing right here. You can see flakes are starting to chip off. I saw some very extreme heat. Yeah. Now, dropping it probably doesn't make it any better, but that part just fully broke off. But you can see this is not in good shape. But the good news is we did catch it in time to where we actually don't need to replace the entire engine or rebuild the entire engine. All we have to do is just replace these bearings, check the main bearings, and that's it. So now I know what I need to order. I'm gonna get it ordered, and in the next video we can actually repair it and get it running. So stay tuned for next time. Like and subscribe.